Hey everybody, it is Anne back at you with another video. Today we are going to be discussing TV shows I fell out of love with. There's basically three things that all the shows that we're going to talk about today have in common. There's 4 reasons why I think this happens, and 5 shows in total that we're going to discuss. I didn't plan it that way, it just kind of worked out. So yeah, every show we're going to talk about today, one is a show that I would have said was like one of my favorite television shows at some point in history. These are not things I was just a casual viewer of. These are shows I was pretty into at one point. 2, they're all shows where I can't really like pinpoint a specific time where I deliberately decided to stop caring about them. It's things where, it shows where my relationship gradually declined over time. And then 3, they're all shows where I've reached a point where I'm not even sure I care to finish them. Maybe I will someday, but for the most part I've kind of just like made peace with however far into that story I got, and I don't really care. So as I was going over my list of shows and trying to figure out why I stopped liking them, there were 4 things that kept coming up over and over again. One is a decline in quality, so sometimes later seasons of a show just don't really live up to those earlier seasons I fell in love with. I think that happens to a lot of people, and sometimes it's not really any more complicated than that. Reason number 2 is an increase in competition. So even if a show doesn't really get worse or doesn't really change at all, sometimes as more shows kind of start to try to do the same thing, that show doesn't feel as special as it once was. And then reason number 3 would be a decline in cultural relevance. So sometimes TV's a lot more fun when it feels like everybody's watching the same thing. I'm talking about shows like Game of Thrones, shows like Stranger Things, 13 Reasons Why had that for the first season, where you get that sense of like, wow, oh my gosh, everybody is watching this thing. I need to watch it as soon as I can or else it's gonna get spoiled or whatever. I wanna be part of that like kind of cultural conversation, so I have to really stay on top of this show. And some shows have that in their earlier seasons and then don't really have it in their later seasons, and so that kind of social pressure to watch it goes away, and so does my interest sometimes. And then reason number 4 is just a kind of conflict in distribution. So maybe like the show comes out on a night of the week when a bunch of other shows I like also come out, and so I don't really keep up with it as much. So sometimes just a show makes choices with how it's distributed that affect my ability to get super excited about it. But anyway, enough talk about that. Let's get to the shows. These are in no particular order. Show number 1 is Orange is the New Black. This was one of the pioneers of streaming television, the idea that you could see a whole season at once. And I got into this when only 2 seasons were out. So that would have been, I think, like 2015-ish was when I really discovered it. And season 2 is still my favorite. And if you know the show, you know that it kind of centers around a certain Piper Chapman. And most people who like the show don't really like Piper Chapman that much. She's kind of a spoiled rich girl, and most of season 1 centers around her. And I totally get why it had to, you needed that sort of like outsider perspective. But I think a big part of why some of the mid to late seasons didn't do so hot is because they still kept trying to force this show to be about Piper when they had already written so many other more interesting characters into the show. So season 2 is about this kind of like race war between 2 different gangs, and you have these like really like badass motherfuckers at the top of each gang. You have Red in one corner, you have V in the other corner, and everyone in the prison is taking sides, and I don't even fucking know what Piper was up to in season 2, and I'm not even sure I care. And through seasons 3 and 4, they kept trying to be like, now don't forget, this show's about Piper, now don't forget, this show's about Piper. Even though the stories they were giving Piper were not nearly as interesting as the stories they were giving to other prisoners. They were just, I think, a little too slow to embrace the ensemble nature of what they had created. So I did watch season 3, and like when season 3 dropped, I was really excited about it. And then it was kind of just like, okay, this was not as good as season 2, but I guess I still like the show. I'll still watch season 4 when it comes out. And then season 4, actually season 3 and 4, is when they decided to give Piper this plot line about like running an illegal sexy panty business where she sold like underwear to like perverts on the outside. And they gave that plot line like a lot of time. And I would much rather have been learning about like Nikki struggles with drug addiction. I would have much rather been learning about like so many of the other more interesting characters they had created and developed. And instead they kept trying to like throw Piper in my face. So I think that's a big part of why by the time season 5 came out, I wasn't even like feeling the show anymore. Another thing I want to talk about with Orange is the New Black is some of those distribution issues that I alluded to earlier. Traditionally, in network television, TV shows run like September to May. And yes, you have to wait a week between each episode, but you get your season finale in May, and then you get your season premiere in September. So you're pretty much never waiting more than 3 or 4 months for a new episode. Whereas with Orange is the New Black and other shows that kind of did this streaming paradigm of like, here's the whole season, binge it all at once. The problem with that then becomes that after you finish a season, you're literally waiting over a year for new episodes. And one of the things I've learned about myself as more and more shows do television this way is that I eventually just stopped caring. I know that sounds bad. And like if you watch Orange is the New Black, you know season 4 ended on like a hella cliffhanger. And I remember when I first watched that finale, I was like, holy fuck, what's gonna happen? But once I've had to live over a year of my life not knowing what happens, that, oh my gosh, I need to see what happens feeling just kind of goes away. I just kind of make peace with the fact that I don't know. And then by the time new episodes come out, I like don't really remember what happened in the last season. And keep in mind, through that whole year of not having new Orange is the New Black, that's a whole year that I'm finding other shows to watch and discovering new things. And I don't know, I found that when I have to wait a super long time between seasons, like that affects my ability to really have that same enthusiasm when the new seasons do come out. Moving on to show number 2, we've got Doctor Who. Doctor Who, I remember being a really big thing in like high school / maybe my first year or 2 of college. And I think part of that is I ran in a very like nerdy, bookish circle. And like you did have that feeling in like 2010, 11-ish that like if you weren't watching Doctor Who, you were like out of the loop on something. So I think part of that is as I like went away to college and made new friends, like I didn't have that same pressure to like keep up with Doctor Who. And then the other thing is that Doctor Who episodes come out on Saturday nights. So unless you are in like a squad of people that also really want to make it a priority to watch Doctor Who on Saturday night, it's very easy to just like fall off the wagon with it, I found. Because there's like a lot of my friends wanted to go out and do other stuff. And I would say at the time I'd be like, oh, I'll catch up, I'll like binge this later, but like I never got to do that. So the other thing about Doctor Who is that it's kind of in the show's DNA to just completely reinvent itself every couple of years. Their central character is the Doctor, and the Doctor regenerates, which basically means that the Doctor will die and then they recast a new actor to play that part. And they also give every new actor a fair amount of liberty to put their own spin on the character. So they don't just expect everyone to imitate Doctor Number One's performance. And then in addition to that, the companion usually gets swapped out more often than the Doctors do. And in the case of the companions, those are actually brand new characters that come on, as opposed to just a new actor playing the same role. Where I found that I kind of fell off the wagon was around the time that they wrote Amy Pond and Rory. I guess he's not Rory Pond, but whatever, the Ponds. Where I fell off the wagon was around the time that they got written off the show. And the episode where they get written off is like pretty emotional. And then like I just never found myself able to get invested in Clara, who's like the companion that came on afterwards. And I never watched any of the Doctors out after Matt Smith. Again, part of that is the like being in college and just my TV habits changing and not really wanting to stay in and watch TV on Saturday night. Part of it's that. But then the other part is also just not having that ability to get invested in brand new characters every couple years and just kind of missing the characters that I had initially gotten into. And I think for some Who fans, that's like part of the fun of it. For me, it was just like, no, I liked these people. These people are gone. I don't like these new people quite as much. And yeah, that's why I just eventually stopped really caring about Doctor Who. So show number 3 is Scandal. Scandal I remember watching in part out of rebellion against all the people that told me to watch House of Cards. So that was, again, probably 2015-ish. I was working in politics at the time. Pretty much everyone was watching House of Cards, and I tried to get into it, but never really did. But Scandal was my shit for the first couple seasons. And when I think about why I fell off the wagon with Scandal, part of it is that I didn't love how later seasons just seemed to keep recycling some of the same plot points. In the pilot, spoilers for the first episode of Scandal, in the pilot you find out that Olivia Pope is sleeping with the president. And every time that I thought that this plot line had like ran its course and we had moved on to bigger and better things, the writers kept trying to say like, and don't forget, Olivia and Fitz love each other. And around season 5-ish was when I was like, I can't do this anymore. And then another issue I had with Scandal was when I first got into it, it was on Netflix. So to me, it's a very bingeable show. I loved it when I could just watch episode after episode. And then when I caught up and I was like, okay, great, I'm gonna watch like the new season as it comes out, I found that it just didn't work in a week by week format the same way. So at the time I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna wait till it's all on Netflix. And I never ended up catching up on it. There were other things on Netflix that I cared more about. Again, I was getting just like fed up with them trying to make Olivia and Fitz happen and trying to constantly like one-up themselves. Because the thing about I think really any of the Shonda Rhimes shows is they start out relatively grounded and realistic, and that's cool. But then as crazier shit starts to happen, it gets to the point where like with every new season, they're like, oh my gosh, we have to like one up the ridiculous bonkers bullshit we did last season. And as they keep climbing up the ladder of ridiculous bonkers bullshit, it eventually gets to a point where it's just not really grounded anymore. And it's not really the show that I initially fell in love with. Oh, and then there's also this whole thing about, what's the first lady's name on that show? Mellie. There's a whole thing, so a little bit of a spoiler for like later seasons of Scandal. There's a whole thing about like her running for senator. And like, when you've reached the point where, you know, the first lady's running for senator and the president's cheating on his wife, blah, 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 blah. There's a part that's like, okay, so it's the Clintons. Like, we get it. I know. I'm hard to please because on the one hand, I'm complaining that like the show wasn't grounded enough. And then on the other hand, I'm complaining that it was too similar to like a real world couple. What can I say? I know, I'm terrible, I'm hard to please. So it was a combination of all those factors of it, you know, not being as bingeable with it, the writing, trying too hard to keep upping the ridiculous bonkers bullshit, and as well as them keep trying to do the whole like, oh, don't forget, Olivia and Fitz are endgame, when it kind of just lost me. On to show number 4. We have Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time is one of the first shows I really remember Netflix binging. I got into it like shortly after I got out of college, and And I graduated college in 2014. So like right in that sweet spot of when TV was starting to kind of shift more into the Netflix binging model. And Once Upon a Time season 1 was great. I loved how it was dramatic but still like fun. It wasn't too dark. It was one of the first like hour-long network television shows I ever saw that was like, oh, we can do drama, but we don't have to make it too dark or too melodramatic. It can just be like fun fantasy fairy tale nonsense. And I was all about it. I loved season 1. It's definitely one of those shows where I feel like season 1 was written with them not being entirely sure if they were going to get a season 2 or not. Because for the most part, season 1 has a very satisfactory ending. They tie up all their loose ends. Great. Season 2, it took me a little while to get into because they basically flipped the show on its head at the end of season 1, and everything you thought you knew isn't true anymore, and yeah, so the first couple episodes, it took me some time to get into, but ultimately I still ended up liking season 2. I was still with it. It was still one of my favorite shows. Season 3 is another one of my favorites. Season 3 is the one where they go to Neverland. So this idea of like a magical like multiverse where there's not just like the Magic Kingdom is a part of Disney World, but the Magic Kingdom where like Snow White and Prince Charming are falling in love, but then there's also like Neverland. I think Oz is in it. What's some of the other ones? Arendelle, we'll get to Arendelle in a bit, but Wonderland, was one of them too. Alice in Wonderland. So this idea of like different magical universes that all have slightly different rules was like really interesting to me. Plus like you get, sexy Captain Hook in season 3, and yeah, I was liking season 3. I haven't watched this show in a while, but I remember it as being better than season 2. So if you were to get into this show today, I would probably tell you to stop there. I would say watch seasons 1 through 3 and call it a day. Season 4 is where they decided to bring Frozen into things. They brought Anna and Elsa into it. So season 4, what year would season 4 have been? Around, I think, 2015-ish. And so, like, the actual Frozen movie came out the end of 2013. So this came out right in the throes of Frozen mania. And so this was really the first time that it became painfully obvious that Once Upon a Time was just going to use its show to kind of promote other Disney content. And it's when it kind of became less about telling cool stories and more about just saying, hey, don't forget, we're on ABC, we're Disney, and Disney owns everything. And I still watched season 4. I remember finding it entertaining, but like not as good as the earlier seasons. But I was like, okay, like it's lost some of its shine, its magic, but it's still entertaining me. I'll still watch it. And where Once Upon a Time like really started to lose me was more in season 5, because this was when they decided Cruella de Vil was going to be a character, and that didn't work for me because 101 Dalmatians doesn't have any like magical supernatural element to it. It's just about an evil lady wanting to kill puppies. So it really had no reason to be part of this whole like fairy tale fantasy landscape that Once Upon a Time is set against. The only thing it had in common with those other stories is it happened to be another Disney movie. And so this is when it just became more about like Disney promotion than it became about like telling an organic narrative. As the 2010s progressed, more and more people were figuring out how to do like the hour-long drama in more of like a fun, lighthearted tone. So things like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend or Jane the Virgin, where there's still a lot of drama, but there's also this kind of lighthearted fun aspect to it. And as more and more shows started to do that, Once Upon a Time didn't feel as special anymore. So the final show we're going to talk about is actually very close to my heart. It's one of the first shows I ever remember telling people was my favorite TV show. And that is The Simpsons. And there was a time in my life, probably early 2000s-ish, as a child, I would watch 3 episodes of The Simpsons like every single day because one of our local channels had syndicated episodes at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock. And then another one of the channels would do a 6:30 episode. So I would watch 3 episodes in a row pretty much without fail. And the beauty of watching shows in syndication is they can kind of stick to the episodes that are actually good. Like they don't show as much of like the really early episodes before the show really figured itself out. And they didn't show too many of like the later episodes that, you know, were not as good. Because pretty much everyone agrees that like 90s Simpsons is where it's at. And I was kind of getting into the show about the time that's usually considered to be the beginning of the decline of The Simpsons. And I loved how this show could be funny, but it could also have its sort of like charming and endearing moments. And, you know, it was one of those shows where you didn't really need to like keep up with it. Pretty much every episode is just a self-contained thing. And yeah, I loved it. A lot of people in my family loved it. It was something we could kind of watch together. And this is one that's kind of affected by all 4 of those things that I talked about earlier. Again, like there is just kind of a decline in quality. Later episodes are not as good. And for a very long time, like you also had no real way of streaming the older episodes that were good. The Simpsons is on Disney Plus now, for those of you who didn't know. So if you want to go back and like watch the good seasons of The Simpsons, you can now. But for a long time, you were kind of limited to the newer seasons that were So like once those channels that decided to syndicate, you know, Seinfeld or whatever the hell else replaced The Simpsons, like I started watching more Seinfeld and I had no way of watching like good Simpsons episodes. And then the other thing is just more shows came out. Like as I got older, I discovered South Park. Bob's Burgers came out, BoJack Horseman came out. So there's just like other shows I reach for now when I'm trying to scratch that sort of like adult animation itch. And I don't know, it's just a show that I'll still always love it. I'll still always love those like 90s episodes of it, but I don't care to keep up with it. So those are my 5 shows. I'd love to hear your take on this. Tell me about shows that you used to love that now you don't love so much. Tell me why you think you fell out of love with them. Tell me what other shows you kind of went for instead. I'd love to know, and I'd love any ideas you have for other TV content for the YouTube channel. My name's Anne, and thanks for watching.